All right, getting started with our text as image exercise. I'm now going to go into the basic text tools that we're going to be working with, and then I'll also show people how to transform the text that you input using these couple of text tools. So first, let's just go over to some of the panels and windows that we're going to probably want to make sure we have visible. And one of them is definitely the character. Oh, sorry. So this is all under type, and you want to make sure that you have the character window open in that character panel. So if you don't already have it over here in this right-hand side, and you can access it by clicking on that, then you want to make sure to go up to Window and select it under Type, and that is also the hotkey of Command or Control T. And so that brings up this panel. And for those of you that have something where you have these panels that are all floating around, a couple people have asked this on the message boards, but you can always, in order to dock these, you can drag them into open panels, and then if you have the entire panel off of in the workspace and not anchored to anywhere, you can drag the whole thing in to these different workspace areas. So you can have these. You can, once you call these up under the window option in that top menu, then you can always bring them into and anchor them to these different, to this right-hand toolbar docking area. So you're definitely going to be using, for this exercise, the character panel a lot. And now, the other tools that you're going to be using are all living underneath this type tool, which is in the toolbar. And this, I think, is the default tool that's up, but in case it isn't, it's directly located below the pen tool, and then to access all the different tools that live below this type tool, which are area type, type on a path, vertical type, vertical area type. You have a lot of them. We're going to be going into these four here, and some in this video and some in another video, but you just have to hold down on this icon in order to get to these different tools. And then it's also possible to pop this out, and that's by going over here to this far right hand side of the drop down list, and then that gives you these options here. So that might be a little bit easier. I'm not sure. It really just depends on what your work style is. So to start with, we're just going to start with this type tool, and the hotkey to access this is T. So keep that in mind. It's going to save you a lot of time. And then going to come over here and zoom in a little bit. And so now that you have this tool selected, this is the tool that you use to input text when you are ready to start working with inputting text into your exercise or your project. And then it also is the tool that you want to have selected in some cases when you're editing that text. And I'll show the difference between editing text and then transforming the text using the direct selection tool. So first, how do we input text? We can input text in two different ways to start off with, and it's really important to know the difference between these two different options because they behave really differently after you have input that text. So first, I'm going to show you the most basic way, which is to simply click anywhere on the artboard or the canvas area with that type tool selected, and then you get this. Depending upon what your version you're working with, you might just get a blinking cursor. If you're working in CC, then it puts down what's called lorem ipsum, which is essentially just like gibberish, but it's to give you a sense of, oh, this is what the text is going to look like. So I'm going to now write out my sentence. People are trapped by history. Whoops. History and history is trapped in them. So that is the most basic way of inserting or inputting text using the type tool. And then what I've just imported or input is line text because I only clicked with that tool once in the artboard area. So now you'll see that the cursor is still there, but I'm done with working with this text right now. So this is similar to the way that a lot of these other tools work, where in order to stop using that tool, you need to use the direct selection tool in order to select out of it. So you have a couple of options. One shortcut that I found is really, really useful. When you hold down the command key, or if you're on a Windows machine, the control key, you see that all of a sudden your cursor turns into that black arrow. And what that means is that that's actually a hotkey for selecting that black arrow. And so when you have that key held down and you click anywhere else on the artboard, then suddenly you see that the cursor is no longer blinking. This text line is no longer active, and I can go here and enter in a new line. So I'm just going to enter in people, and then I'm going to enter in history. And I'm doing this all just by clicking once with the type tool selected. And I'm going to show you some different ways to transform these and to further edit these right now. So the main difference between the line type entry, which is what we're doing here, and then another kind of entry, which is to actually draw out a text box and then inputting text that way, is that when you are drawing out text areas, you're actually able to tell Illustrator when to create automatic breaks in your text. So this doesn't matter right now because we're working with very small fonts, so I'm going to make these fonts larger. So there's a couple of ways to do that. First, if you hold down, if you again select the type tool, when you hold it over an area of type, you can select that, and then that behaves the same way that it does with word processors. You can go up here in the character area. This is where you can change the different parameters of this text object. So it's the same thing as changing the color of a shape. You're able to change the font and then also the size. So that's also the same thing is changeable in the character panel on the right hand side, and these two are showing the exact same information. So the first thing that I want to show is, let's go to that font that we're going to be working with. It's not Myriad, it is Helvetica. And then you can do things like change the style of the character, and then here it is the size. And then for these, if you're ever wanting to input it directly, you can just double click, and you can also do that in these areas too. So this is what I was talking about with this line type. So the only way to get breaks when you're working with line type, and this is text that you've entered when you've only clicked once on the artboard area, is you have to do the returns. So standard way of creating line breaks is you have to hit return, and if you don't do that, then as you saw here, this just extends forever infinitely off of the artboard. So when you're dealing with a sentence, it's not that big of a deal, but when you are suddenly dealing with a huge, like, pages and pages of text, and we're not doing that for this project, but you probably will at some point use this again, and you don't want to have to sit there and enter in every single line. It can become very frustrating. So the way to deal with that, and I'm having a weird refresh. Okay, there we go. That was just a little glitch in Illustrator. I know, shocking, that never happens. So the way to deal with that is to use the type tool, and instead of using it to enter in line text, you can use it to draw out the box, an area of type, and that will automatically create those line breaks. So I'm going to do that now. So I have my type tool selected. It's the same tool, it just behaves in two different ways depending upon what you do with your mouse. So instead of just clicking once, I'm going to click down and then drag. And as you see here, I now have this text area that I've defined by dragging out a rectangle space when I had that type tool selected. So I'm going to select my selection tool momentarily, and now I have this, and I can move this around. And one thing, let's go into basic transformations with these, and just to show the difference, I'm going to better illustrate the difference, I'm going to copy this. I'm I'm going to come in here, double click, and then paste. When you have the direct or the selection tool selected, if you double click on an area of text, it'll automatically allow you to edit it without requiring you to go over here and select the type tool. So that's another little shortcut. So we have the same sentence now, but it's input in two different ways. This one was input by using the line text, and then this one was input by drawing out an area of text and then copying and pasting this same text in here. So, and just to show some basic differences between these two different types of text, beyond just having to create breaks with this text by using return, is the first one is how Illustrator treats these things, these different types of text when, and let me just clear this out really quickly, is how Illustrator treats transformations on these two different types of text. So first, I'm going to show a transformation on the line text. So I have selected this, I have my selection tool selected, and then it brings me up this familiar looking bounding box. And so this is actually something that it behaves the same way it does with shapes and with lines. It allows me to do things like change the size, and then when I press down Shift, it maintains the aspect ratio of that type and that proportion, which is very important when you are working with text. Unless you are very intentionally trying to change the aspect ratio, you want to keep that aspect ratio. It's part of the design that goes into creating text that's legible, so that aspect ratio is very important. And obviously, in this project, you're going to be able to work with different transformations, and so you don't need to maintain that aspect ratio. You just want to make sure that you're doing that intentionally. So I can rotate this the same way that I would rotate a shape. When I have this selected, I can also go up here and I see these character attributes, so I could change this back to regular, and I don't even need to use the selection tool to do that. But keep in mind that changes the font of the entire text object. If you're wanting to do this word by word, then you would need to use the text tool to highlight a single word, and then you can apply those different parameters to that single word. But then keep in mind, when you are using the selection tool, if you go up here and change this, and you see that this is blank, and that's the same thing as the question mark that you see in the color palette when you have a group of objects that are all different colors. So this is the same thing as saying, well, there is a standard font applied to this text object, and there is a standard size, but there's two different styles. So if I were to go up here and then go back to regular, it would make everything regular, or if I went back to bold, it would make everything bold. So I'm going to undo, I'm going to keep that like that, and then now I want to show that the differences here. So this is the text that I input into a text area that I had drawn out by holding down the text tool and dragging a text area. So I want to show this. Now when I have the same bounding box, I have the selection tool selected. So I imagine in my head, I'm like, okay, if I change this bounding box is going to scale this text the same way that it did here, but it doesn't. It does something different. So because I've input this as area text, it's not scaling the text itself, it's scaling the area that the text is fitting into. So all this is doing is this is changing where the breaks are happening. So for area type, the only way to change the font and the scale is to select it and then come up here, and then you can change it this way. So I have selected it, and then I've gone up to that top menu bar, and I'm able to change the font size, but also keep note that this area has not changed. So I'm able to fit in more text here because I'm changing the font size of the text, but the area that it's fitting into is still the same because of the different properties of area text versus line text. So the other thing that changes with this is when you rotate, again, it doesn't rotate the text itself, it rotates the container that the text is being put into. So you get these interesting effects that are a little bit different. And when I move this up, it turns it into a line. So remember this, that the best ways to work with this area type, it's probably better for when you're dealing with text that you are very concerned with fitting into a specific area, and you're not wanting to have to create line breaks, and maybe you're wanting to play around with different font sizes, different types of fonts, different font styles, but you know that you want the text to extend to a certain point, and you don't want to be messing around with worrying about creating line breaks over and over again. You want to use the line input text when you maybe are working with a sentence or even a single word or a single letter, and that's what I did over here. I created these using the line entry text because I knew that I'm only going to be working with these one words, so it's a lot easier to be able to create basic transformations when you are working with that line enter text. So the last couple things I want to show are how to apply different properties to these different basic text examples here and these basic text objects. So I am changing the font here, but let's say that for people, I really want this to be the exact same size as this. So I want this people to be identical to this people. So how do I do that? I could hold it over here and try and guesstimate. I could look at this information here. So I have this selected now, and then I'm looking up top and I see, okay, the font size is 34.68. So now I can select this and I could input that there. But a really quick way of doing this is to select the text object that you're trying to apply a very specific style to, and then go over to the eyedropper tool or press I for the shortcut, and then you can actually just set it by clicking the eyedropper tool on whatever type you want to transfer or you want to apply to the text object that you have selected. You again just select that eyedropper tool and then click it over that model other text object. So the same thing happens with things like color, and then you can also change the properties of text color the same way that you can shapes. And for a lot of these properties, the way that you change them are very similar to how you work with shapes. So all the different ways that we have been changing parameters of shape objects and line objects in these previous exercises, you can do the same thing with these text objects, but then because they're text objects and they're a little bit special, you can actually do a little bit more. So let's go over to history, or actually for people. I want to make this bold. Let me zoom in here. And then I'm going to change the color, so I can do that by double clicking on this palette. I can go over here to the color panel. That's the one that I'm used to. I'm going to make it this blue. And now if I want history to be the same font and the same font style and also the same color, then I'm going to select that just with with the selection tool. I'm going to hit I to bring up the eyedropper tool, and then I'm going to click on people to apply all those different elements to history. So now history is in the same font style, and has the same fill applied to it. So what happens if I only wanted to apply the same color? There's a little extra step to that. I do the same thing. I select history, I select I, and then I hold down. What do I hold down? I hold down Shift. Yes, okay. There's a lot of different hotkeys. So I hold down Shift while I'm clicking over people. And so that's just applying the fill color to history. And I want to show something that happens a lot. Let's say you, for whatever reason, you had the stroke property actually highlighted. So the stroke property is what's on top over here in the color palette, or it's what's on top in the color panel. If you were to then hold down Shift and you're thinking, okay, this is going to turn history blue, the same blue the people's in, what just happened is because I had that stroke on top and not the, and so that's actually saying that that property is what's selected. It has applied that color, that fill color that's in people to the stroke color that's in history. And that goes in to show that you actually can apply a stroke and an outline to text. And if I didn't like that, I can make that invisible again, and I can go and actually apply that fill. Okay, so I think this is a good place to stop. I really just want to reiterate a couple of things, and that the main thing here is that the difference between the line text and then the area text, and you're able to input both of these by selecting the type tool and clicking to enter the line text, or dragging out an area text box and an area for the text to be input into, and that's how you are able to input the area type.